She didn't cry when the dirt closed over her, just held the tag between her fingers and waited. Eli Carter wasn't looking to save anyone that day, but he dug anyway. And when he found her, the whole world shifted. A girl marked broken. A man already broken. The shovel hit something soft. Eli Carter froze, boots sunk in the wet edge of the grave, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't stone, not wood, something that gave too easily beneath the steel. Flesh. A body. He dropped to his knees, fingers clawing through the loosened soil. His gloves came off without thought. It was only when his hand brushed cloth, then skin, that he swore, louder than the wind tearing down the canyon. His pulse throbbed behind his eyes, his breath short and hard as he tore into the earth like a man possessed. And then she was there, a girl, small, maybe 10, buried shallow, curled on her side with her arms wrapped tight around herself. Her skin was gray with cold, lips tinged blue, lashes crusted in frost, but her chest rose. Once, then again, barely but breathing. Eli didn't shout, didn't pause. He hauled her up out of the dirt, staggered backward into the slush, and stripped his coat in one motion, wrapping her in the wool still warm from his own body heat. She didn't stir, not even when he cradled her tight and ran, boots pounding through frozen mud back to his horse tied at the post above. He didn't think. Not about the frostbite already blooming on her hands. Not about how long she'd been down there. Not even about what kind of man buried a child alive and rode away. He just mounted up, wrapped the girl against his chest, and rode. Hard, fussed, toward the ranch that hadn't known noise or life since Maria died, where only ghosts waited behind the doors. The girl didn't speak the whole ride back. Her fingers never unclenched. When Eli finally laid her on the couch by the hearth and pried them open to check circulation, he found a small tag crumpled in her fist. Paper torn at the corner. Someone had scrawled across it in black ink, "Damaged goods." Eli stared at it for a long moment, heat from the fire at his back, cold rage crawling down his spine. Then he tucked the note aside and worked on warming her, stripping off her wet clothes, wrapping her in quilts, dabbing melted snow from her forehead. Her eyes never opened, but she flinched when his fingers brushed her wrist. Not pain, not cold, fear, deep, bone-cutting. "Easy," he murmured. The word came out rough, foreign to his own throat. "Ain't nobody here gonna hurt you." He stayed by the fire all night, watching her breathe, counting each faint rise of her chest like it might be the last. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Not after what he'd seen. That grave. That tag. The way her ribs stuck out like broken wings. And always that one question he couldn't answer. Why? By dawn, color had returned to her cheeks, faint and slow. Eli made coffee, more for something to do than anything else. He barely noticed the cup go cold in his hand when she stirred. A twitch first. Then her fingers shifted beneath the quilt. Her eyes opened next, startled, wild, so full of panic he almost dropped the cup trying to get to her. "It's okay," he said quickly, kneeling beside the couch. "You're safe." She tried to bolt. Her limbs flailed under the quilt, weak but frantic, legs kicking for escape. Eli raised both hands. "Hey now, don't. Look, I'm not going to touch you. You're all right. You're not buried no more." Her eyes locked on his. That froze her. Like the word buried cut through whatever fog was left in her mind. Her whole body went rigid. Then she sat up and retched onto the floorboards. He let her, waited while she dry heaved and shook, ribs shuddering under skin stretched too thin. When she finished, she looked up at him, pale and panting. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Where's the wagon?" "Ili furonet." "What wagon?" "The wagon. With the others. They said I was the last." Her voice cracked, the sentence falling apart like paper soaked through. "He said I wasn't worth the space." Eli's heart thudded, not just from her words, but the way she said them. Blank. Rehearsed. Like something she'd been told so many times she'd begun to believe it. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She shook her head. He said not to tell. "I ain't him." A long silence followed. Then, finally, in a whisper like she barely dared believe it, "June?" He nodded once. "June. All right. My name's Eli. Eli corta. She blinked. Like the cattle? He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh, or maybe just surprise that she could still joke. Yeah, like the cattle. She didn't smile, just lowered her eyes and pulled the quilt tighter. You should have left me. Ilias Yov Dimsith. Not how I was raised. He was, she said, and that quiet sentence knocked the air clean out of the room. She didn't say who. Eli didn't ask. He didn't need to. He let the silence settle then, heavy but not cruel. Outside, the frost clung to the edges of the windows. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and June sat still as a carved doll, her eyes fixed on nothing. By midday, she could sit up on her own. He made her broth, and though she refused the first spoonful, hunger won out. She ate in tiny sips, never letting go of the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Eli didn't push. He just sat nearby, mending tack by the window, pretending not to watch her every movement like a man afraid she might vanish the second he blinked. Later, while the sun melted frost from the roof, she asked, "Do you have children?" He froze. He said simply. Boy. Name was Thomas. She didn't ask what happened. Maybe she already knew. She looked down into her empty bowl and whispered, I had a sister, Ili Voitit. When nothing more came, he only said, Yeah. June nodded once. We were supposed to be sold together. That was it. No tears. No tantrum. Just facts. Eli had never heard anything sadder. That night, he laid her down on a real bed. She resisted at first, panicked at the softness, the covers, the idea of being alone. But exhaustion dragged her down. He sat outside her door until long after midnight, listening for nightmares. They came. Muffled sobs. Whimpers. Once a scream so broken it turned his stomach. He didn't go in, but he stayed. The next morning, she didn't speak. Not when he offered breakfast. Not when he asked if she wanted to sit by the fire. She stared at the window, watching the wind ripple through the dry grass. He let her be. Then the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Confident. Measured. Eli stood instantly, hand to the revolver still dusty from disuse. He opened the door to find 2 men on horseback. Clean coats. High boots. No trail dust. Morning, the taller one said, tipping his hat with a snake oil smile. Name's Fletcher. This here's my partner, Ames. We're looking for a girl. About yay high. Might have wandered off from her people. You haven't seen her, have you? Eli didn't blink. Can't help you. The other man, Ames, cocked his head. Strange. We tracked a wagon up the ridge. Fresh prints. Thought maybe she took shelter. Eli's grip on the door tightened. You calling me a liar? No, sir, Fletcher said easily. Just saying it'd be a shame if the wrong sort of folks found her before we did. Something in the way he said it made Eli's blood run cold. He stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. You best keep riding. The men looked at one another, then back at Eli. Ames smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll be around, he said. They rode off slow, deliberate, like men who already had a plan. Eli didn't go back inside for a long time. When he finally did, June was sitting up on the bed, eyes wide and glassy. Was it them? She asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't have to. June didn't ask again, and Eli didn't volunteer more than she seemed ready to hear. But something had changed between them the second those men rode up the ridge. The kind of change that couldn't be spoken, only understood. She no longer flinched when he crossed the room. She no longer kept her face turned from the light. And when he asked if she wanted to sit by the hearth that evening, she nodded once and followed. The quiet stretched long between them, broken only by the soft clink of Eli's cup against the wood and the faint sound of wind scraping past the shutters. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, wrapped again in that same quilt. He noticed how she always kept her back to the wall, how she watched the door like she expected it to open and end everything good she'd begun to imagine. You think they'll come back? She asked suddenly, voice so low it almost disappeared into the crackle of fire. Eli didn't lie. I know they will. She nodded slowly, as though she'd already known that answer. If they come, she whispered, will you give me back? Eli didn't respond right away. He took a long sip from his cup, letting the heat anchor him in the moment. Then he set it down carefully and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes steady on hers. "No," he said simply. June didn't cry. She didn't even blink. But her fingers tightened on the edge of the quilt like a rope pulling her from some pit she hadn't known she could climb out of. She turned her face back to the fire, but Eli saw the smallest shift in her shoulders, a loosening. That night, she didn't scream in her sleep. Not once. By the next morning, Eli had a plan, at least the start of one. He didn't know how many men Fletcher and Ames had behind them, or who they answered to, but he'd lived long enough on the wrong side of war and land feuds to recognize the scent of bad men cloaked in legal clothes. The kind who knew exactly how far they could push a thing before the law caught up, and just how much money it took to make sure the law stayed blind. He needed help. But help meant questions, and questions meant risk. Still, he saddled his horse just after breakfast, instructing June to stay inside and keep the bolt drawn until she saw his signal. 3 knocks, slow and spaced. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes flicked to the rifle by the hearth as though measuring whether her small hands could lift it if things went wrong. Eli didn't like leaving her, but he liked being unprepared less. Town was nearly 2 hours west, a scatter of buildings where everyone knew everyone and most minded their business until gossip sweetened it enough to swallow. He rode in past noon, his coat thick with trail dust and eyes sharp for any unfamiliar horses tied up out front of the saloon or post office. Fletcher's type often left shadows behind, even when they'd gone. He found Clara Jennings at the general store, elbow deep in flour and arguing with a supplier. She spotted him before he spoke, wiping her hands on her apron and meeting him outside with a weary smile. "You didn't come here for grain," she said. "What's wrong?" Eli told her. Not everything, just enough. About the grave, the girl, the men sniffing around. Clara didn't ask for more. She just listened the way her husband once had before consumption took him, steady, still, and sharper than anyone gave her credit for. "Do you think they'll come into town?" she asked. "No," Eli said. "I think they're watching the ridge, waiting for me to leave her alone." Clara folded her arms. "And what if you don't?" Eli met her gaze. "They'll stop waiting." She didn't answer at first. Then slowly she nodded. "You want me to wire anyone? I want to know who's missing a wagon train. Anyone report children gone missing? Girls especially." Clara's mouth thinned. "You think she was part of a shipment?" Eli didn't have to answer. The look on his face did. Clara exhaled, glancing toward the telegraph office. "Give me an hour. I'll see what comes back." He left her then and made his way to the back of town where the stable master kept a quiet lean-to used mostly by older ranchers looking to sell stock or drink without being seen. There he found Artie Wendell, nursing a bottle and losing at cards. Artie had been a scout once, then a bounty man, then just a drunk, but his memory was sharp and his ears sharper. "Carter," he said, squinting up from his busted hand, "ain't seen you in a coon's age. You finally come to lose a few dollars." "Looking for a wagon," Eli said. "One that didn't make it to its end." Artie blinked. "Which direction?" "East to west. Early winter, maybe a month back. Might have gone quiet around Dead Horse Ridge." Artie set down his cards. "There was one," he said after a beat. "Couple wagons, light cargo. No kids I saw, but plenty of crates with side slats. Like they wanted things to breathe." Eli's stomach turned. "You see who ran it?" Artie scratched his beard. "No names, but they were clean. Real clean. Like city clean. Said they were moving stock for some new orphanage down south." Eli's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Anything else?" "One of the wagons came back," Artie said quietly. "Empty. He left before the bottle could tempt him into breaking it across someone's skull." By the time he returned to Clara, she had a note in hand. "There's been 3 missing girl reports filed in the past 2 weeks, she said, scanning the telegram. "All different counties, ages between 9 and 12. One was last seen in a holding town near Elkhorn. Said she was waiting for placement. Sound familiar?" Eli nodded grimly. "More than you know." He rode out before sunset, not bothering to stop at the saloon. He wanted to get back before the light failed, before those men decided to test their luck again. But when he crested the final rise toward the ranch, he saw something that made his heart plummet. The front door was open. He kicked his horse hard. The beast responded with a snort and a burst of speed, hooves hammering the frozen earth. Eli swung off before the horse fully stopped, racing inside, calling her name. June! No answer. The fire still burned, but the room was empty. The rifle by the hearth was gone. He turned, only to find her behind him, crouched in the loft, barrel of the gun trained on the open door. Thought you were them, she whispered, shaking. I saw the dust on the ridge. I thought they were coming. Eli exhaled slowly, lifting his hands. You did good. But next time, stay hidden. I was, she said softly, until I wasn't sure if hiding was enough. That night, neither of them slept. And as dawn cracked open over the land, June asked the question he'd been dreading. What if they already know I'm here? Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. They know, because down by the creek, where the water had frozen over thick, 2 new sets of horse tracks had appeared. Not coming, not leaving, just circling, like wolves. The horse tracks vanished by mid-morning, but the message stayed. Eli didn't need a bullet hole in his door to understand what Fletcher and Ames were saying. They were watching, waiting, testing his resolve, checking if the man who found a half-dead girl in a grave would hand her over when the pressure climbed. What they didn't know, what Eli was starting to remember himself, was that he wasn't built to bend. June didn't ask about the tracks again. She watched Eli from a distance, studying how he moved, how his jaw locked when he scanned the tree line, how he left the rifle within reach now no matter what he was doing. He tried not to let her see the worry, but she saw it anyway. Kids like her, kids who'd survived the kinds of things you didn't write down, knew how to read fear, even when it hid under steady hands. After supper, Eli went outside to check the fences. June followed without asking. She'd begun doing that, shadowing him through chores, sweeping the porch, counting hens in the coop like it was a job she'd always done. He didn't stop her. He didn't want to. The place felt less like a mausoleum with her in it, even if she barely spoke some days and only smiled when she forgot she wasn't supposed to. At the far end of the fence, a slat had splintered. Probably a deer, or maybe just old wood worn down by wind. Eli set to replacing it, hands methodical. June crouched a few feet away, plucking dried grass from between the fence posts, silent for a long time before saying, He said I was born wrong. Eli paused mid-swing. The hammer hung there in the air, waiting. He said girls like me could never be wives. Said I was only good for a short while, then not worth feed. The words weren't trembling or sad. They were recited, like scripture carved into the soft part of her brain. Eli didn't speak, just drove the nail in with one hard crack. He called me inventory, she added softly. The others, too. Said if we did well, maybe we'd get sent somewhere warm. But only if we stopped talking so much. Eli's grip tightened on the hammer. The wood handle creaked. She stood then, brushing dust from her skirt. Do you think there are more? Of him, Eli asked. June shook her head. Of me. The question cut deeper than the hammer. Eli had been trying not to think about it, not to wonder how many girls had passed through those wagons, how many had been dumped in shallow graves when they got sick or loud or simply inconvenient. But June asked because she had to know, and she deserved the truth. I think there are, he said. She didn't cry, just nodded. Then we should find them. The wind picked up, rustling dry branches. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk screamed into the fading sun. You just got out of the dirt, Eli said quietly. You sure you want to go charging in a fire? June looked up at him, eyes older than any child's had a right to be. What's the point of being pulled out if I don't do something now? Eli had no answer, not one that would satisfy either of them. That night, after she'd gone to bed, he took out Maria's old ledger. It still smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. He flipped through the worn pages, not looking for numbers or debts, but names. Friends, allies, people who might still owe him something, or at least not shoot him for asking. He circled 3 towns and underlined one name, Callum Finch. Callum had been a lawman once, then a bounty hunter, then something murkier, but he'd never taken kindly to the buying or selling of people. If anyone could help track down where the girls were coming from, and where the rest had gone, it was him. He sent the wire the next morning. June stood by his side while he sent it, watching the operator tap out each word like they might be a matchstick ready to spark something bigger. She didn't ask what the message said. She just waited. The reply came 2 hours later. Come south. Bring the girl. It's bigger than you think. Eli didn't like that, but he didn't ignore it either. He packed lightly. Food, blankets, enough ammo to matter. He buried Maria's ledger under the hearthstone where no thief would find it and left the ranch with June seated behind him on the saddle, her arms around his waist, eyes wide and unblinking as the prairie opened around them. She didn't speak during the first hour. Then, suddenly, she leaned forward and whispered, "If something happens, don't bury me again. Just burn it all." Eli didn't reply. He just rode harder. They reached Stiller's Crossing by dusk, a small town wedged between two dry creeks and a bluff of rust-colored stone. Callum waited by the old barn just east of the square, leaning against a post like a man who hadn't aged a day despite the silver lining his temples and the limp that hadn't always been there. "Eli Carter," he said with a faint grin. "Thought you were dead." "Close enough," Eli said. "This is June." Callum nodded solemnly. "June," he said, "you're real brave coming all this way." June didn't smile. "Are there more?" Callum looked at Eli, then back at her. "Yes," he said. "Too many." He led them into the barn. Inside, 5 girls huddled near a lantern. Quiet, small, none older than 12. One wore a sling. Another had a bandage over her eye. All of them flinched when the wind rattled the boards. "We found them near Fort Ashby," Callum explained. They were being walked to a rail yard. Shackled. June stepped closer. "Did they have tags?" Callum frowned. Some did. Others just numbers on their wrists. "It is gut churnt. You get them in?" Callum nodded. "Some. Not the ones running it. These are drivers. Guards. Paid to keep them quiet." "How deep does this go?" Eli asked. Callum's face hardened. "Government contracts. Church funding. Orphan placements that never existed. They're moving girls through ranch towns, frontier crossings, places nobody checks too hard." June looked at the other girls, then at Eli. "We have to stop them." "We're trying," Callum said. "But it's slow and quiet, because the minute they know we're close, they'll bury the rest," Eli finished. That night, they slept in the loft above the barn. June curled beside Eli, not out of fear anymore, but focus. Like she needed to rest because there was work ahead. The kind you don't walk away from. Eli didn't sleep. Not really. He lay awake watching the sliver of moonlight shift across the boards and wondering how many graves like hers dotted the plains. How many parents never knew? How many girls had begged with their eyes and still been buried alive because someone decided they weren't useful anymore? He wasn't sure when he made the choice. Maybe it had been made for him the second he saw her chest rise in that shallow grave. But by morning, he wasn't a rancher anymore. He was a man with a purpose. They set out early with Callum and the 5 girls under watch by Clara and her husband, who had driven in from town to help when the word reached them. Eli didn't ask how news spread so fast. Some things deserve to spread. June rode in front this time, not behind. She didn't want to be shielded. She wanted to see. They reached a crossing town by noon, one marked on Callum's list as a possible relay stop. It looked clean. Church bells, banners, a schoolhouse. But Eli had seen battlefields that looked peaceful before the killing started. They went to the registrar's office first. A man with thin spectacles and a round belly greeted them with a smile too wide and hands too soft. Eli watched his eyes closely. "We're looking for missing transport wagons," Callum said. "Placement services. State-sponsored. That ring a bell?" The man chuckled nervously. "We do run placements here, yes. But we haven't had a shipment, arrival in several weeks." June's eyes narrowed. "Do you keep records?" "Of course," the man said, blinking. "But they're private. For guardians only." Eli stepped forward. "We'll see them anyway." The man's face paled. I can't," Callum flashed his badge. "Now." The man relented. Inside the back office, they found 3 ledgers. Neat handwriting. Arrival dates. Names. Ages. But as Callum turned the pages, his frown deepened. "Something's off," he muttered. "Too many arrivals. Not enough transfers. No outgoing records. Which means they're not being placed, Eli said. They're being held, June whispered. Suddenly a shot cracked through the window. The registrar screamed and dropped to the floor. June hit the wall. Eli dove for her, covering her body with his own as the second shot punched through the doorframe. Callum yanked his gun and kicked over the desk. Sniper. Rooftop east side. Another round splintered the corner of the wall inches from Eli's head. They weren't watching anymore. They were starting the war. Eli didn't think. He acted. Years of old war instincts surged through his limbs as he yanked June by the collar of her coat and hauled her behind the ledger cabinet. Callum had already returned fire through the shattered window, but the angle was poor and the glass didn't help. The registrar whimpered behind the overturned desk, hands over his head, mumbling prayers to a god who'd long since stopped answering from this side of the frontier. Back exit, Callum barked. We saw one when we came in. Eli nodded and turned to June. Stay low. Stay right on me. You don't stop, no matter what happens. She nodded once, jaw set in a line of pure resolve, not fear. He knew that expression well. It lived in the faces of men who dug trenches and buried friends without blinking. It shouldn't have lived in a child's face, but this land didn't care what was fair. The back hallway was narrow and dark, lined with storage crates and dusty maps. Eli pushed through first, Callum covering their rear. Another shot rang out, this one punching through the wall near June's head. Splinters bit in her cheek, but she didn't cry out, just ducked lower, kept moving. The back door was padlocked. Eli didn't bother with keys. He planted a boot against the frame and kicked. The wood splintered open. Sunlight flooded the hall, and they were out, sprinting into the alley behind the building, hearts hammering. Somewhere above them, a man cursed and ran across a rooftop, boots scuffing shingles. Eli didn't stop. Barn, he said. South end. They ran. Dust rose behind them as another round smacked the dirt inches from Callum's heel. Then, from across the square, two men appeared, one with a shotgun, the other with something longer slung across his back. They weren't townsfolk. Too clean. Too ready. Keep moving, Callum growled. They burst into the barn moments later, the door slamming shut behind them. Eli dropped the bar into place, just as the echo of boots and voices filtered from outside. June leaned against the wall, catching her breath, eyes blazing. We were followed, she said. Callum nodded grimly. Whole way from Stiller's. Should have known. Eli glanced at the stall where his horse waited, already saddled. We need to get back to the others. If they know we're onto them, they won't just wait anymore. They won't leave witnesses, Callum added. June stepped forward. Then we don't wait, either. The plan wasn't clean. It wasn't even good, but it was all they had. Callum would stay behind, double back through the church, and find a wire out, send warning to Clara, to any allies left in range. Eli would ride for the girls, for the ranch, for the rifle he'd left by the hearth. June would ride with him. You sure? He asked her quietly, crouching as he tightened the saddle. She met his eyes. I'm done hiding. You said the same. That was true. They rode out the north trail, staying off the main road, sticking to deer paths and dry creek beds where hoof prints disappeared fast. The land flattened to yellow grass and skeletal brush, wind slicing hard from the west. Somewhere behind them, the dust cloud of riders began to build. Not close yet, but not far. By nightfall, they'd made it halfway back to the ranch. The sky burned low with the orange of firelight as the sun dropped into the hills. They camped beneath a cluster of old cottonwoods, water pooled in a frozen basin nearby. Eli made no fire. He didn't want to be seen. They ate cold jerky and shared canteen. June didn't complain once. She sat wrapped in her coat, her knees to her chest, her eyes scanning the dark like she expected shadows to move at any moment. I think I remember one of them, she said suddenly. Eli looked over. The man in the window. I think he was one of the ones who loaded the wagons. Back when I first got taken. Did he see you? I don't know. Maybe. Her voice dropped. But he looked like he didn't care either way. Ili iksualit. They'll care soon. June hesitated. Then, in the quiet that followed, she said, Do you think your wife would have helped me too? The question hit like a stone dropped in still water. Eli stared into the dark, the image of Maria flickering behind his eyes. Her laugh, her hands, the way she used to brush dust off the kids who wandered into her garden like stray cats. She would have sat beside your grave till you woke up, he said. Would have made you pie before she asked your name. June smiled just barely. Then maybe I'm lucky you found me. Eli didn't answer. He didn't know how. They rose before dawn, before the wind. The sky was a deep violet, and the frost turned the grass into crystal. They mounted quickly, riding silent and fast. The land blurred past them, hills rolling like the backs of sleeping giants, and just before noon they reached the ridge overlooking the ranch. Smoke. Too much smoke. Eli's stomach dropped. He yanked the reins, halting them just short of the rise. They dismounted and crawled the last stretch. Below, the barn burned. Flames chewed through the roof, thick black columns rising into the sky. The house door hung open. No movement, no sound. Eli's heart raced, panic slamming into his ribs. June grabbed his arm. Wait, she whispered. Look, from a far side of the field, a small figure darted between the trees. Then another. Then three. Clara's husband. Two of the older girls. Alive. Hidden. Eli exhaled hard, then rose into a crouch. They scattered. They're not all gone. June nodded. Then let's go get them. They moved low fast. Around the ridge, down through the dry creek, up the gully behind the house. They reached the cabin just as two men exited the front door. One carrying a bag, the other holding a torch. Eli recognized the torchbearer. Ames. He didn't wait. The first shot hit the torch, sending fire leaping up the man's arm. Ames screamed, dropped it, turned, and caught the second bullet in his thigh. He went down hard, howling. The other man ran. Eli didn't chase. Inside, he barked and June followed. The cabin was trashed. Drawers pulled, shelves shattered, blood on the edge of the hearth, but no bodies. No small ones. Clara took them, June said, scanning the room. She got them out. They heard movement from the barn then, a whimper. Eli ran, June on his heels. The barn roof groaned, half gone, flames still flickering near the rafters. Inside, under the trough, a girl huddled. No more than 7, covered in soot. Eli hauled her out, past her June, and together they fled just before the roof collapsed behind them. The girl clung to June, sobbing now. They said you were dead, that they killed you. Not yet, June said softly, and not ever if we can help it. They found the rest an hour later, hidden in a dugout past the southern fence. Clara bruised, but alive, her husband already cleaning his rifle. 3 girls, one limping, the other 2 pale but safe. They came this morning, Clara explained. So they were here for the girl you stole. We didn't answer fast enough. You held them off. We ran, then circled back and set the fire. Figured if they thought it all burned, they might not look so hard. Eli shook his head in disbelief. You could have been killed. We already buried 1 girl this year, Clara said. I wasn't going to bury another. The night was long. They didn't go back to the ranch. They made camp deep in the hills where no light could be seen. Eli sat beside June. The other girls curled around each other nearby. You're not just a rancher anymore, June said. No, Eli said. Not anymore. She nodded slowly. So what now? Eli didn't answer. Not yet, because somewhere out beyond the mountains was the man who gave the order. The one who marked the girls like livestock. Who buried June. Who sent Ames and Fletcher and a dozen like them. And Eli knew exactly what he had to do next. He wasn't going to run. He was going to dig up the rest of the truth, even if it meant putting himself back in the dirt to do it. They rode out under cover of fog, thick and pale and dragging low over the ridge like breath from a wounded animal. The land below was silent, scorched in patches where fire had licked the barn and the yard but hadn't reached the dugout. Clara remained with the youngest girls, tucked deep into the ravine where water once ran before the drought. She didn't argue when Eli said he and June wouldn't be coming back until this was done. She just gripped his forearm hard and pressed a map into his hand. This mark here, she whispered, tapping the edge of the page. It's where they send the wagons after they pick up. My cousin worked freight there before he disappeared. Said they built something into the canyon. Said the shipments didn't go east or west. They just vanished. Eli didn't need to hear more. They left the same hour, riding light and fast, horses breathing hard by midday as the earth pitched beneath them into sharper ridges and darker woods. The path Clara had marked led through an old wash long forgotten by maps, one carved out by snow melt, its walls lined in shale and whispering pine. By dusk, they reached the shelf above the canyon. June slid from the saddle and crept to the edge, belly to the ground, Eli close behind her. Below, nestled in the throat of the canyon, was a compound. Not a shack, not a camp. A full, deliberate structure. Fences layered in barbed wire, a gate shack with lights, and buildings squared off in military precision. There are no signs, no flags, no roads leading in. Just two dirt tracks worn deep by wagon wheels. They watched as one approached now, pulled by a pair of dappled grays, a canvas cover draped over the back. Two men sat up front, one holding reins, the other a rifle. Ilias Yov Glenshith. Same wagon, June whispered. Same kind that took us. They waited until the wagon had been ushered inside the gate, then backed away from the edge. Eli unfolded the map again, fingers tracing Clara's cousin's notes. There's a runoff tunnel, he muttered. For rain. Cuts through the west wall. If we move now, I'm going with you, June said before he could finish. No, Eli said. You stay up here. You see anything go wrong, you ride back to Callum. You take Clara. You scatter. June didn't blink. You said we weren't running anymore. I said I wasn't. You're still a child. I'm not, she snapped, voice low and fierce. I was. Before. Not anymore. She stared at him, eyes locked, unflinching. Eli saw it again. That look. The one Maria used to wear when she decided on something, and no amount of thunder or reason could shift her. He sighed. Then you follow exactly what I say. You move only when I move. You stay behind me, always. June nodded once. And that was that. They waited for night. The canyon shifted colors with the setting sun, gray to black, shadows piling thick in the wash. They moved like ghosts, threading between rocks, boots careful not to slide on loose shale. The runoff tunnel was narrow, hidden behind a thicket of dried reeds and brush. Eli cleared the entrance with his knife, then ducked inside, June following close behind. The passage stank of rot and mold. Water clung to the stone in cold beads, dripping in steady rhythm. It twisted twice before opening into a grate. Eli pressed a shoulder to the bars. Loose. Someone had been through here before. Or someone inside didn't care. He pushed it free with a grunt and climbed out into darkness. They were beneath the southernmost building, tucked in shadow. Eli could hear voices above, men laughing. A radio hummed through an open window. He motioned June forward, pointed toward the far end of the building where lights burned low. They moved silently through the underbelly of the compound. Inside the main building, Eli counted at least 8 men from the windows. 2 dozed near a stove. 1 paced. Another cleaned a rifle, expression board. June tugged his coat and pointed far side the second building. No lights. Smaller. And from the sliver between boards, a flicker of movement. They crossed fast, ducking behind barrels and carts, the night stretching long. Eli picked the lock on a back door and slipped inside. It was worse than he imagined. The room was lined in beds. Not cots, bunk crates with straw, thin blankets. No pillows. Along the walls, shelves with folded dresses. Tags hung from nails. Girls' names. Numbers. Some crossed out. And in the back corner, 5 girls sat huddled. One stood as they entered, fists clenched. You're not them, she said. No, June answered first. We're getting you out. They didn't hesitate. No questions. Just stood, took each other's hands. That told Eli all he needed to know about what kind of place this was. Eli moved to the back window. You've got to run. Fast. Up the trail. Head east until you hit the pines. Then turn north and don't stop until you see a cabin with 3 cedar posts out front. That's Clara. She'll take you. The oldest girl stepped forward. What about you? I've got a few words to say to the men who built this place. June passed the girl her water flask. Go. They slipped out the window and disappeared into the dark. Eli waited, counted seconds, then turned back toward the building they'd seen earlier, the one with the guards, the laughter, the gunfire from the radio. He handed June his revolver. Use it if you have to. Otherwise, stay out of sight. She took it without blinking. Eli kicked the front door open. The first man barely looked up before Eli dropped him with a single shot to the shoulder. The second reached for his gun too slow. The third dug behind the stove and fired once, the round slamming into the wall near Eli's arm. Eli returned fire, the blast deafening. The room filled with smoke and shouting. Outside, the alarm was sounded, some kind of bell. Heavy boots hit the dirt. Voices yelled. June crouched behind a barrel, gun drawn, breath ragged but steady. Eli kicked over a table and fired again, dropping the last man in the room. Then he stepped over bodies and grabbed the ledger off the desk. Names, routes, payments, dozens of pages. He heard the footfalls before the men arrived. 5 of them, armed, ready. But Eli Carter wasn't aiming to survive. He was aiming to bury this thing for good. He stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. You're done. They hesitated. Walk away, he said, voice flat, or I drag your names into every newspaper west of the Mississippi. The lead man, slick-haired, pale, a scar across his lip, laughed. You think people care? You think anybody gives a damn about little girls with no names? Eli didn't answer. He just fired. The shot hit the ground inches from the man's boot. You're going to wish that bullet was in you, the man hissed, raising his pistol. But he never got the chance to shoot, because June pulled her trigger first. The round hit the man in the side. He dropped, screaming, clutching his hip. The others turned in shock. Eli didn't waste the opening. 3 shots, precise, one after the other. The rest scattered. When the smoke cleared, Eli lowered his rifle. June emerged slowly, face pale but determined. He walked to her, put a hand on her shoulder. You all right? She nodded, but her voice cracked. I didn't want to, but he was gonna, I know, he said. And you did what you had to. They set the building alight. Every ledger, every crate, every dress. Then they took the horses tethered out back and rode. All night, they reached Clara's by dawn. The girls are there. Safe. Fed. Alive. Callum rode in by mid-morning. Got the wire, he said. Federal men are coming. Might actually stick this time. Might, Eli said. But we don't wait on maybes. He handed Callum the salvaged ledger. Names, towns, routes. Tear it all down. Callum nodded. I'll make sure of it. June sat on the porch, watching the horizon. The firelight still flickered behind her eyes. Eli sat beside her. You scared? He asked. She shook her head. No, just not done yet. He smiled faintly. No, he agreed. We're not. They'd lit the match. Now it was time to see what burned. The storm didn't come from the sky. It came from the wire. By the end of the week, the prairie towns buzzed with rumors that a trafficking ring had been dug up out near Hollow Creek, that girls with no names and numbers pinned to their dresses had been found locked in sheds meant for cattle, that a rancher, Eli Carter, a widower with no business in politics, had lit the fire himself. The fire spread faster than anyone expected. Some wanted justice. Others wanted it buried again. Some had a hand in the profits, and now found their names in ink on a federal ledger. Letters flew like locusts. The kind of men who once laughed over poker tables in smoke-filled saloons and now sat rigid in courtrooms, their boots polished, their brows damp. But not all of them would stand trial. Some had vanished before the wire reached their doors. And in that gap between exposure and consequence, danger grew. They came for Eli at night. 2 wagons. 6 men. Hired, not official. They didn't wear badges. Didn't knock. Just cut the fences and rode straight toward the house Clara had turned into refuge. By then, nearly a dozen girls lived there, some fresh from the dark corners of canyon freight lines, others older, rescued in smaller raids fed by the same ledger that Eli had delivered. Callum had ridden out the day before, heading to Carson to speak before the governor's council. Eli had wanted to go too, but June had refused to be left again. And the others. Clara, the girls, the dogs that barked at everything but never bit. They needed someone who still slept with his boots on and his gun loaded. The night they came, Eli was already on the porch. The moon was a silver scythe above the trees, thin and curved and cruel. He saw them crest the hill, silhouetted in lantern light. Quiet, confident, not men used to hearing the word no. He didn't wait. He fired once into the air and shouted down. That's close enough. The lead rider halted. Raise both hands. Ain't looking for trouble. Eli cocked his rifle. Then you picked the wrong house. Just here to collect something that doesn't belong to you. Eli's finger didn't leave the trigger. Name her. The man hesitated. You know which. You say her name. Behind him, the door creaked open. June stepped out. No coat, barefoot. Still she stood tall. I think he means me, she said. Eli didn't glance back. Go inside. They already saw me. Doesn't matter. But June didn't move. The lead rider took off his hat. Ain't nothing personal, Mr. Carter. We got a job. You give her over. We ride away. Eli lowered the rifle slightly, then swung it toward the second wagon. You got firewood in the back of that. What? Firewood? Or is it empty, waiting for something to haul back? The man scowled. You trying to be clever? No, Eli said. I'm trying to figure how many of you I need to shoot before the rest ride off scared. There was a pause. Then behind Eli, a sound, metal sliding against wood. June had lifted the shotgun from the porch wall and cocked it. Her voice didn't tremble. You'll be the first, she told the man on the left. That was enough. The lead rider swore under his breath, yanked his reins hard. Ain't worth it, he muttered. Boss said bring her back. Didn't say die for it. He turned. The others followed. Hooves thudded against the dirt. The wagons rolled away. Eli let out a slow breath. June didn't lower the gun. You all right? He asked. She nodded. I just hate them. Eli walked over, eased the shotgun from her arms. That's not a bad thing. But don't let it hollow you. Is that what it did to you? He looked out into the dark, where dust still hung from the wagon wheels. Some days. She didn't press. They didn't sleep that night, nor the night after. They rotated watch, took shifts by the door. Clara locked every window, kept the fire low. The girls didn't ask what happened. They just stayed close, watching every stranger who passed the fence line. But something had changed, not just around the ranch, but in June. She stopped asking if Eli would leave again. She stopped flinching at every shout. Instead, she started working the forge with him, hammered metal into usable shape, helped repair fences, learned how to tack a horse, how to ride bareback when there wasn't time for saddles. And in the quiet between those days, she started to talk. Not all at once. Just pieces. My sister's name was Elsie, she said one morning while shoeing a gelding. She didn't make it. She was in the same wagon as me, but they pulled her out first. I screamed so hard my throat bled. Eli didn't answer, just nodded. She was only 8. Later that same week, while cooking with Clara, she said, before that, I had a dog. Rusty. Smelled like smoke all the time. But he was good. He bit the first man who came into our yard. Again, nobody said anything. Clara just stirred the pot and wiped her eyes when June wasn't looking. By the time Callum returned, with a promise that indictments were being drafted and that governors were finally listening, June had memorized the trail from the ranch to the North Creek. She knew the names of every girl who lived with them now. She slept with her boots on. But then, the letter came. Not a warning, not a threat, a request. Eli found it in the post bag one morning. A simple envelope addressed in blocky handwriting. He opened it on the porch, June beside him. You're invited to testify. Capitol Hall, Carson. Your account may determine the outcome of the trial. Bring the girl. Her voice may do more than any bullet could. Callum read it twice and spat. They want to use her like a banner. Ili nodded, but we knew that was coming. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You take her, you better make damn sure she doesn't walk into another kind of fire. June spoke before anyone else could. I want to go. Eli looked at her. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. She paused. For Elsie, the ride to Carson was 3 days of bitter wind and stony paths. The closer they got to the city, the more the dust gave way to cobblestone, to uniforms, to order. June stared at everything. The lamps, the train cars, the men in tailored coats who looked at her with polite confusion and didn't know she'd once clawed her way out of a grave. They gave them a room, one with a soft bed, a fireplace, a table set for two. June sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at her hands. "They're going to look at me," she whispered. Eli knelt beside her. "They'll listen too. I don't know what to say. Tell them what they did, what it cost. Tell them what kind of world it is when girls like you have to become their own cavalry." She looked at him. "Will it change anything?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it'll hurt them. And maybe that's enough." The trial began at noon the next day. June wore a simple dress Clara had sewn for her, the hem stitched with gold thread that shimmered faintly in the courtroom light. She walked in beside Eli, her head high. The room was packed. Reporters, lawyers, politicians who hadn't cared a year ago but now wanted to look clean. They called her name. She stood behind the witness railing, both hands clenched. "What happened to you?" the judge asked softly. June didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She told them everything. The wagon, the tags, Elsie, the crate she woke up in with dirt still in her mouth, the voice she heard when Eli pulled her free, the fire that burned because she couldn't. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Not heavy, not empty, just still. And then Eli stood. "I found her with a tag marked damaged goods," he said. "But she's the strongest thing I've ever seen. If the court wants to understand the damage done, don't look at her. Look at the men who put that tag there. Look at the silence they relied on." Later that night, back at the room, June curled on a mattress and stared at the ceiling. "Do you think they believe me?" she asked. "I think they wanted to," Eli said. "I hope it hurts." Eli turned to look at her. "I hope it hurts them," she said again, voice hard. "Like it hurt Elsie. Like it hurt me. Like it hurts to remember." Eli didn't argue. He understood that too well. They stayed another 2 days in Carson, waiting to hear the ruling. But when word came, it was only a delay. More paperwork, more testimony, more politics. And so they left. They rode back to the ranch, slower this time. Not fleeing, just returning. As they neared the southern fence, Eli saw them. 3 new girls waiting by the gate. Clara beside them. And beside her, a man in federal blue with a notebook and a badge. Another case. Another raid. Another name crossed off the ledger. Eli looked at June. "You still ready to be part of this?" She didn't answer with words. She just rode faster ahead of him toward the girls, toward the story that wasn't done yet. Because the tag might have said damaged goods. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Not even close. June pressed her palm to the split rail gate and stared at the girl nearest it. She couldn't have been older than 7. Thin wrists. Shoes too big. Eyes too blank. She didn't cry when she saw June. She didn't smile either. Just looked at her the way an animal might look at a storm, uncertain if it should run or submit. June dismounted and knelt in front of her. No questions. No speeches. Just held out her hand. The girl didn't take it right away. But she didn't run. That was enough. Clara ushered the others inside as Eli walked up. The federal agent trailing them had his hat off and notebook in hand, eyes tracking the small figures with the same mix of pity and professionalism Eli had come to expect from men in uniforms. He looked like he wanted to say something, some polished line about justice or restitution or change, but Eli didn't give him the chance. "Get your facts," he said quietly, "but don't pretend your words make any of this easier." The man nodded, lips tight. "We're doing what we can. Not fast enough." "I know." He left not long after. The girls stayed. The door to the cabin was left ajar, so none of them would feel locked in. Clara made stew even though she'd already cooked. June helped the new ones clean up, showed them where the wash basin was, taught them the names of the animals out back. It took hours to coax a full sentence out of any of them. But by nightfall, one of the girls asked if she could sleep with the quilt that had stars sewn on it. June didn't answer. Just tucked the quilt around her and made sure the lantern burned low but steady. The next morning, Clara pulled Eli aside near the pasture. "She's not the same girl," she said softly. She's more." Eli didn't respond right away. He watched June from a distance, watched her lift Ben onto the back of the mule and show him how to grip the reins. "She's still becoming," he said finally. They worked through the day. mending fences, shoring up the south wall where wind had snapped 2 of the outer planks, organizing supplies sent by the towns now rallying behind their cause. Donations had begun to trickle in. Boots, canned goods, blankets, even books. The townsfolk who once side-eyed Eli in the post office now asked if they could help. Some sent their sons to patch fences. Some sent their daughters to help teach. But with kindness came danger too. That evening, Callum returned with news. The last trial stalled again, he said, stepping down from his horse. Judge claimed insufficient evidence on the Carson line. Eli narrowed his eyes. They have the ledgers. They say the ledgers are hearsay without witnesses. The girls are too young. Half the records were burned. And the men on the stand? Every last one swore they were just moving goods. Never looked inside the wagons. Clara leaned against the post, jaw tight. They're saying ignorance makes them innocent. Callum nodded grimly. And there's more. Eli, someone's been asking about you in Dust Ridge. Not just you, your land. There's a rumor a deed swap got filed in Carson. Someone's trying to take the ranch out from under you. Eli stiffened. On what grounds? Unfit stewardship. Harboring fugitives. Endangering children. That's nonsense. Callum didn't argue. Doesn't mean they won't try. Eli turned his gaze toward the barn, where June had disappeared to help Clara with a new foal. The sky was beginning to dim, long amber streaks pulling across the plains like ribbon. He felt the storm before it came. This time not fire, not wind, something slower, legal, calculated. The kind of destruction that didn't leave ashes, just empty homes and names crossed off paper. That night, he sat with Clara long after the children had gone to bed. They didn't speak much, just watched the fire crackle. But eventually, Eli reached beneath the hearthstone and pulled out the tin box Maria had once kept letters in. Inside, his land deed, a pair of Maria's earrings, and the worn birth certificate for their stillborn son. Proof of roots, proof of history. He placed the deed in Clara's hands. If they come, he said quietly, and if I can't stop them, this place stays with you. You know how to run it. You know how to protect them. Clara's eyes brimmed. You're not going anywhere. I might not have a choice. She gripped the paper tightly. Then neither do I. The next morning brought riders. Not bandits. Not drifters. Officials. Dusty coats. Ledgers and leather folders. They dismounted with calm efficiency, their horses tied neatly to the gate. June was the first to spot them. She didn't call out, just stood very still, watching. Eli stepped onto the porch as the tallest man approached. Mr. Carter, he said smoothly, we're here on behalf of the Territorial Child Oversight Commission. We have reason to believe that several minors are being held here without proper guardianship, identification, or legal placement. We've come to remove them. Eli didn't move. You're not taking them. The man smiled, like he'd heard that before. We're not here to argue. Just here to do our duty. You're about 30 years too late for duty, Eli said. Where were you when they were buried in crates? When they were passed like freight? Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. No, the man nodded to his colleague. A third man moved toward the barn. That's when June stepped in front of him. She didn't raise her fists. Didn't scream, just said one word, loud and clear. No, the man froze. Clara stepped up beside her. You heard her. The others appeared then, one by one. The girls, barefoot, thin, but unafraid. They stood together on the porch, behind the gate beside the barn. One line, unbroken. Callum arrived minutes later, dust still clinging to his coat. I've just spoken to the governor's office, he said, dismounting. Any attempt to remove these children without due process will be considered a breach of state law. You so much as touch one of them, and you'll be the ones in court. The officials hesitated. Callum handed them a copy of the most recent ruling. The signature was still wet. They didn't leave quickly, but they left. And when they were gone, June finally exhaled. That night, the wind carried laughter instead of fear. The girls played by lantern light. Someone found an old fiddle in the storage shed, and Clara coaxed a tune out of it that made the little ones dance in their bare feet. The dogs barked happily at the stars. And for the first time in a long time, Eli allowed himself to smile without caution. June sat beside him on the porch, legs swinging gently over the edge. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "Probably. Then we'll be ready." He looked over at her. She'd grown taller, her voice stronger. There was still pain there, but no longer fear. Just fire. "You're not damaged goods," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away, just stared up at the stars. "I know." Somewhere, off in the dark, another wagon creaked across the road. Another girl waited to be found. Another story hovered just outside the fences, waiting to be brought into the light. But tonight, here, in this place, there was peace. Not forever, not perfect, but real. And that was more than most ever found. The morning didn't bring noise. It brought quiet, the kind that settled deep into the bones, the kind that felt earned. The kind that only ever came after surviving something nobody thought you could. Eli rose before the sun, like always, but this time he didn't move with urgency. He made coffee slowly, set 2 cups out instead of 1, and stood barefoot on the porch while the horizon bled from navy to pale gold. The land was still. No hoofbeats, no riders, no men in coats with lies folded in their ledgers. Just a faint rustle of wind against the high grass and the creak of a new day stretching into place. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. June padded out, wrapped in the blanket Clara had stitched for her back in the early spring. Her hair had grown past her shoulders now, still tangled from sleep, but her eyes were clear. "You didn't wake me," she said. "You needed rest. I don't think I'll ever sleep like that again." Eli handed her the coffee. She sipped it and made a face. "Still bitter. It's not meant to be sweet," he said. June looked out toward the fields, where the sun was just starting to catch on the frost that hadn't yet melted. "You gonna leave again?" she asked. "Now that things are quiet." "No." She didn't answer, just nodded and leaned against the porch post. Below them, the ranch stirred. Clara's voice drifted out the kitchen window, soft and low, humming a tune that had no words but felt like something stitched from memory. Callum sat near the barn, oiling the hinges on the new gate Eli had built with June's help. A few of the younger girls darted between laundry lines, their laughter bouncing through the cold air like it had been there all along, just waiting for permission to rise. There were 17 of them now, 17 girls, each with a different past, each with a tag that no longer meant what it used to. Clara had taken to burning them, one by one, in the stove. No ceremony, no speeches, just the hiss of cheap paper vanishing into ash. But not June's. Hers still sat on the mantel, beneath the carving of the bird Jonas had left them that spring, when he passed through after another one of the raids out west. He'd stayed for 2 nights. He never said goodbye. June hadn't needed him to. The tag remained not as a brand, but as a reminder that she had clawed her way out, that Eli had pulled her free, that she had screamed and bled and walked into a courtroom and made men flinch with the sound of her voice. It was no longer a label. It was proof. Proof she was not what they tried to make her. Eli set down his coffee and stepped off the porch. June followed, matching his pace. They didn't speak as they moved through the frost-tipped grass, past the barn and out toward the lower pasture. A calf had been born in the night. Clara had mentioned it over dinner, said it came early and might not make it. They found it lying in the corner of the field, curled against its mother, breath puffing faintly in the cold. June knelt beside it and placed a hand on its back. "She's shaking. She's scared," Eli said, "and small, but she'll live." "How do you know?" He looked down at June. "Because she made it through the night." June stroked the calf's fur. "She needs a name. You pick." She thought for a long moment, then said, softly, "Elsie." Eli said nothing, just placed a hand on her shoulder. They walked back together, quiet again but not empty. The air had warmed slightly by then. The frost softened into dew. The sun climbed higher. Inside the house, the girls were drawing, charcoal sketches on parchment. One had drawn the mule, its head too big and ears crooked. Another had drawn a portrait of Clara, her hair wild and her smile wide. And one, older, quieter, had drawn June. She stood tall in the sketch, not smiling but strong. Her boots scuffed, her fists clenched. The girl offered it to June with a shy glance. "I didn't know how to draw your eyes right." June smiled. "That's all right. I'm still figuring out how to look. She pinned it on the wall above the hearth. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. The postman didn't even need to knock anymore. He just handed it to Eli as he fixed the front gate latch. It bore the Carson seal. Inside was one line. The last charges held. Convictions confirmed. Sentences pending. You did what they couldn't. There was no signature, just an official stamp and a date. Eli showed it to June. She read it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it between the pages of one of Clara's books. "We're done now," she said. But Eli shook his head. "No, we're not." That evening, he gathered them all. June, Clara, Callum, the girls, even the old ranch hand who'd come back after hearing what the place had become. He laid out the new plans. There'd be another building, a propre schoologia. Some of the funds that had come in from supporters were enough to hire a teacher. A real one, with letters after her name and stories of places no one here had seen. The ranch wasn't just a refuge now. It was becoming a future. And in the middle of it all, June stood, not on the outside, not as the broken piece they'd tried to discard, but as part of its foundation. A girl who'd been buried, labeled, forgotten, who now taught others how to plant seeds, how to build fences, how to survive. Sometimes strangers came to visit. Journalists, ministers, judges. They wanted to speak with June, wanted her to recount the story again, but she'd stopped telling it in full. Now, she told pieces, enough to remind them why they came, but not so much it hollowed her again. The story belonged to her now, not to them, not to ink or wire or politics, just her. And sometimes she rode out beyond the ridge alone. She always took the same trail, the one where Eli had first seen that mound of dirt shifting, the grave that wasn't. She'd stand there for a while, silent. Not mourning, just remembering. And then she'd turn back. One day, she carved a small piece of wood and left it in the ground there. Not a marker, just a shape. A bird, its wings not quite open, its beak tilted skyward. "Elsie," she'd whispered, then walked away. The years passed as they do. Callum stayed longer than he'd planned, then left to open a law office in town, where he made it his mission to fight for those with no voices. Clara remained at the ranch. She taught the girls how to cook, how to stitch, how to command a room without raising her voice. And Eli, he aged. His beard turned gray. His hands stiffened. But he still rode the fences, still mended the gates, still carried the weight of what he'd seen and what he'd stopped. But June, she didn't just grow up. She became. She took over the ranch when Eli could no longer manage the weight of it. Not because she was obligated, but because it was hers as much as it had ever been his. She ran it with firmness, with kindness, with memory. And one winter evening, much like the one that had nearly ended her, a knock came at the door. It was faint, weak, almost nothing. She opened it and found a girl, no older than 5, shoes soaked through, arms trembling. She wore a tag. June tore it off before the girl even said a word. "You're not goods," she said gently. "You're not broken. You're home." And as she carried her in, firelight catching her face, something in the air shifted again. Not an ending, not even a beginning, just a continuation of something that mattered. A story rewritten one life at a time.